Series. China's Nuclear Secrets. Episode 5. Lop Nur. Where the desert gave birth to fire. In the far west of China, amid endless dunes where no tree stands, lies a place once left blank on every map, Lop Nur. A dead land. A dried ancient lake, now covered in blinding salt crusts that shimmer under the sun and winds as sharp as blades. No one ever imagined this wasteland would become the heart of one of the most secretive programs of the 20th century. Yet it was here that China buried its nuclear dream, both a defiance of the world and a testament to the survival of a nation. October 1958. A convoy of military trucks left Beijing at night, heading west. No license plates. No identification papers. Only young men carrying blueprints, notebooks, and a few family photos. They didn't know where they were going, only that their orders said, "This is a top-secret strategic mission. No questions, no turning back." After more than 10 days crossing plateaus, sand dunes, and snow-covered mountains, the convoy halted in a barren expanse. Before them stretched Lop Nur, a place so lifeless that even birds refused to fly over it. No water, no shade. Only wind and sand. By day, the temperature soared above 45 degrees Celsius. By night, it plunged below -20 degrees Celsius. Each step sank into knee-deep sand that burned like fire. A young scientist later wrote in his diary, "If hell has a shape, it must look like Lop Nur." Yet in that land of death, China chose to build life, to forge the weapons of a new age. A city in the shadows would rise from the desert. Nameless and unmarked on any map. It would be known only by a code, Base 21 Lop Nur. In Beijing, Mao Zedong signed the directive. Choose a place where no one dares to live, because we must do what no one dares to do. From that moment, Lop Nur ceased to be an anonymous desert. It became the secret heart of China, where blood and uranium would flow together. Where humans would challenge both nature and their own limits. The first day. No houses. No water. No electricity. Only torn canvas tents pinned into salt-covered earth, and the roar of old bulldozers battling sandstorms. They built walls from dirt, stoves from fuel drums, and roofs from truck tarps. Every drop of water was rationed by the cup. Every stone for construction had to be carried from over 10 kilometers away. The young engineers, students, soldiers built, surveyed, and endured fever, thirst, and sunburn. But no one left. Because they knew. Above their heads stretched the sky of the atomic age. And beneath their feet lay the pride of a nation redefining its destiny. At night, the wind howled like the voice of the earth. But through the darkness flickered tiny flames, oil lamps lit by cracked hands. Those faint lights, night after night, turned Lop Nur from a dead land into a cradle of nuclear birth. The spark of a coming renaissance. December 1958. Cold winds swept across the desert, carrying white salt dust. Tiny human figures moved like grains of sand in a storm. Shouldering steel beams, radiation meters, and frozen rations. From afar, the base looked like a faint plume of smoke. In reality, 10,000 people were building China's first nuclear testing site. No standard blueprints. No foreign experts. Only sketches drawn in chalk on wooden boards. And one slogan painted in red. Rely on ourselves. With our own hands, we will reach the universe. They dug tunnels tens of meters deep, with shovels, pickaxes, and bare hands. The sand burned like coals by day. Froze like ice by night. Machines broke down, fuel was scarce, water had to be hauled for hundreds of kilometers. One ration of water was shared among 5 men, for drinking, cooking, and cleaning wounds. Some died of dehydration. Some were buried alive when tunnels collapsed. But the reports never listed the true causes. Each death was recorded with the same phrase. Fallen in service of the National Scientific Mission. The base was shaped like a half-moon, nestled between low mountains to shield from the wind. At its center stood an underground command post, housing maps and China's first radiation counters. Around it, barracks, a medical tent, fuel depots, and research workshop number 221, the most secret place of all. By day, they fought sandstorms. By night, they fought fear. Every test explosion shook the ground. Flashes tore through the night, shockwaves sent tents flying. Some awoke thinking the sky was falling. Others stared at the light and whispered, "If I die here tomorrow, at least I've witnessed greatness." A young engineer wrote, "We have no monuments, no memorials. But one day, when people speak of China's nuclear power, they will remember Lop Nur." Each morning at 5 a.m., a trumpet called the base to order. Hundreds lined up for assignments, handwritten slips marked by numbers instead of names. Each person knew only their small task. None knew the full project. Some drilled uranium wells. Some measured pressure. Some drafted tunnel maps. They worked like parts of a giant machine, united by one belief: that they were building something that would make the world bow its head. At night, in the freezing wind, tents glowed faintly. Someone played a harmonica. Someone read a letter from home under an oil lamp. Those fragile sounds blended with the desert wind, the breath of history itself. In the middle of a dead desert, they built a nameless city. A place with no official record, no spot on any map. Yet the place where China's heart began to beat with uranium, steel, and blood. Spring 1961. Lop Nur was no longer just a construction site, it had become a fortress of secrecy. Deep underground, tunnels stretched for hundreds of meters like a maze. Crude radiation meters trembled with every reading. Each needle movement made hearts race. In chamber 221, a metal sphere sat on a stand, a bomb model, only for physics testing. But everyone knew that one mistake could kill in seconds. No one dared say the word bomb. In records, it was simply labeled Object 596A. When the ignition switch turned, the entire system shook. Outside, engineers hid in steel bunkers. A dry thud echoed, dust and rocks rained down. Then silence. Only the soft tremor of a radiation gauge. And a thin wisp of smoke drifting from the tunnel entrance. The commander, a scientist once trained in Moscow, bowed deeply and whispered. Nothing exploded, but no one died. That means we've moved one step forward. No one cheered. They simply looked at each other, faces hollow, hands dirty, eyes sleepless. Outside, the sandstorm rose again, blowing toward one direction, the one they called, toward the dawn. But beyond that light lay a long, endless darkness. Radiation began leaking. Workers' skin burned, hair fell, mouths ulcerated. The camp doctor wrote in his logbook, "Cause unknown." Reports sent to Beijing were sealed, never spoken of again. At test tunnel number 5, engineer Lu Kai, in charge of directional blasting, stayed underground for 72 hours straight. When he surfaced, he collapsed, eyes red, breathing shallow. After days in quarantine, he returned to work and said only, "We cannot stop. Others are laughing above our heads." At night, under a frozen sky, many sat in silence, gazing at the stars. No one spoke it aloud, but they all knew. They were gambling with death. One engineer later wrote in a declassified diary, "We do not know what the world outside looks like anymore. We only know that here, in Lop Nur, there are people digging deep into the earth. So that one day, their nation can look up at the sky without fear." Every brick, every bolt, every figure recorded by hand. No computers, no digital tools. Only human hands, and an unbreakable faith that the bomb must succeed. Not only for science, but for national dignity. When night fell, the only light in the base came from the observation tower. Through the storm, a voice echoed over the loudspeaker. "Comrades, today no one has fallen. Tomorrow may be different, be ready." Silence followed, then a faint song began. "We build our motherland in the wind and sand." A weak voice, yet it lingered through the night, blending with the desert wind. The desert said nothing, but it remembered. The first footprints on Lop Nur's sands were not those of conquerors, but of those willing to disappear, so that their nation could stand tall. Half the base was done. The rest was fire. And when that fire finally ignited, the world would know Lop Nur. Not as a dead land, but as the beating heart of a newborn nuclear power. When Lop Nur came alive, and humanity touched the atom. Year 1962. Deep within the Lop Nur Desert, the freshly poured concrete tunnels still glistened with moisture. Above ground, rows of Soviet-style antennas, measurement towers, and cameras pointed toward a single target, Test Zone 596. Where a single miscalculation could erase everything within seconds. After months of model simulations, Beijing sent a top-secret order, codenamed Classified Directive 276. It contained only 7 words. Begin the phase of actual fissile testing. Those 7 words rang like a bell summoning men into the forbidden realm of the gods. From Beijing, a team of senior scientists departed for Lop Nur, led by Qian Sancheng, China's foremost nuclear physicist, once a student of Marie Curie in France. He carried a steel briefcase. Inside was China's first plutonium sample, pure, coin-sized, and powerful enough to burn a city to ashes. When the case was opened inside the sealed chamber, every engineer wore a lead-lined mask. No one dared to breathe too hard. The cold gray metal gleamed, and time itself seemed to stop. Qian spoke slowly, his voice hoarse. This is not just matter. This is the answer. No one asked, the answer to whom? They all knew. It was China's reply to the world that held the atomic bomb above its head. By then, the last Soviet experts had departed, leaving behind unfinished blueprints. China had no simulation computers, no refined fuel, no reliable detonators, only hands, experiments, and blood. One engineer later recalled, "We didn't have modern neutron counters. We built makeshift ion chambers and counted each particle by hand. Every hour, someone was irradiated, someone vomited blood. But no one left." At the base canteen, meals were a thin porridge and a stale biscuit. Some secretly traded half their rations for bits of copper wire or lead strips, materials needed to reinforce the radiation shields. A note from one diary read, "The only thing keeping me alive is the desert wind. Because it reminds me I'm still breathing." Nights in Lop Nur were unlike any other nights on Earth. No sound, no light, only a silence so deep you could hear the metal cooling after a weld. Engineers stood watch in shifts, not to guard the bomb, but to listen to its breathing. If the reactor made an unusual noise, it meant energy was building, and death could arrive in seconds. One night, the audiometer crackled violently. Everyone froze. Qian Sancheng jumped to his feet, staring at the gauge, his hands trembling. Then he exhaled. "It's nothing, just static electricity." They all sighed in relief, and laughed weakly, learning to laugh softly, as if afraid to disturb fate. Days passed. The full test system was assembled piece by piece. Every plutonium sphere, every wire, every lead plate, aligned with a margin of error no greater than 1,000th of a millimeter. Chief Technician Zhang Chang worked 36 hours straight. When he finally stood, he collapsed, still gripping his pen. No one dared move him, afraid to disturb the drawings beneath his hand. A sandstorm struck that night. The winds tore down towers and buried instruments. When the team ran out, they saw hundreds of footprints, deep, sharp, pressed into the white salt crust. Someone whispered, "Maybe someday, when people find these footprints, they'll know we once stood here." No one replied. They just watched until the wind erased every trace. Lop Nur was no longer a construction site. It had become a living creature, breathing through atomic heat, beating with the hearts of men. The weapon of destruction was nearing completion. Each wire, each plutonium crystal, each measurement syncing to the same rhythm. The heartbeat of a nation sharpening itself against mortality. September 1963. On the world map, Lop Nur remained a blank white void. No one outside Beijing knew that China was now closer than ever to birthing its first atomic bomb. On a concrete wall inside the base, someone had written, "There is no way back, only forward." It wasn't a slogan, it was the truth. Once the assembly began, there was no stopping it. A misalignment of 0.1 grams could trigger an early detonation, turning the base into dust. In the underground tunnels, teams worked separately. One calibrated the plutonium core. Another perfected the implosion mechanism, where thousands of conventional charges had to explode simultaneously to compress the plutonium into supercritical state. A microsecond's delay, and the test would fail. Without electronic sensors like the Americans, they relied on razor blades, mechanical watches, and human ears. A young engineer named Sha Lin later said, "We sat in the bunker and listened to test blasts by ear. We judged timing through sound alone." He smiled faintly recalling it, but the fear still flickered in his eyes. Each mistimed sound could have been their last. On the surface, soldiers dug more bunkers and observation towers. They didn't know why, only obeyed orders: build walls, drill holes, run cables. When they asked questions, the only reply was, "State secret." One soldier wrote in his diary, later declassified, "I don't understand why we're here, among sand and wind. But I know this: if we fail, China will never rise again." In Beijing, Mao Zedong received a thin progress report. The project can proceed to live detonation within 18 months. He set down his cigarette, looked out the window at the drizzle, and murmured, "We have eaten grass, now let the world hear our voice." That line became an official directive, and a legend. From that day, Lop Nur was elevated to level 1 top secret. All mail, radio, and telegraph contact ceased. The outside world had no idea that in the heart of a silent desert, a nation was rebuilding the thunder of the gods. Scientists worked in complete isolation. No one left Lop Nur. No one called home. "I forgot the sound of my daughter's voice," one engineer said. "When I returned 3 years later, she didn't recognize me. Those lightly irradiated were removed quietly at night. No one asked where they went." A base doctor noted, "History may never remember their names. But they kept the first test alive." Each night, as the wind howled across the desert, the base echoed like metal breathing. Whispers spread among the workers. "We're living inside a monster, and it's about to wake." October 1963. The bomb assembly entered its final stage. Engineers wrapped the plutonium core in layers of cloth to leave no fingerprints. Every move was logged, minute by minute. When it was done, they placed the metallic sphere, no larger than a watermelon, into a half-meter thick steel casing. One engineer bowed his head and whispered, "If it explodes, we'll be ash. But the world will remember." No one spoke. Only the ticking of the Geiger counter, tick, tick, like their own heartbeat. In Beijing, the test site was marked on a map by a single red dot. No one knew that dot would soon become a radioactive scar on human history. At Lop Nur, those still awake looked at one another and murmured, "The day is near." No one knew if that day would bring glory or extinction. Only the desert wind knew. And it kept blowing, the long breath of history before detonation. October 16, 1964. The skies over Lop Nur were unnaturally clear. No wind, no dust. Only silence, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. From Observation Tower 8, the countdown clock began. T-120 minutes. No one moved. Only the rhythmic beeping of the timer and the faint sound of breathing behind radiation masks. In the main control bunker, Qian Sancheng sat before the ignition panel. He said nothing, eyes fixed on a brass plate beneath the trigger switch. Activate once, never again. T-30 minutes. Total silence. All teams withdrew to deep bunkers 30 kilometers from ground zero. Above, the bomb, code 596, hung from a 102-meter tower. A lonely structure against endless gold sand. Someone had carved 2 words at its base. Peace. No one knew who wrote it. Perhaps a young soldier, perhaps a night shift worker. But amid plutonium and explosives, those 2 words felt both tragic and sacred. T-10 minutes. Warning lights turned red. All channels cut except the link between control room and observation post. Qian gave the final order. Engage final safety lock. A metallic clack echoed through the bunker. Everyone understood. The bomb was now alive. We are touching the blade of history. Someone whispered. No reply. Only pale yellow light on faces, weary but radiant, filled with faith and fear alike. 60 seconds. Emergency exits sealed. All stations ready. 50, 49? Some bowed their heads. Some closed their eyes. Some stared straight at the monitor, determined to see the end of what they had given their lives to create. 10, 9, 8? The bunker trembled. The earth exhaled. 3, 2, 1? A blinding white flash tore through steel walls. Then came the sound, not just a bang, but a tidal wave of force that shook every cell in their bodies. For 3 seconds, everything was light. A fireball hundreds of meters wide roared into the sky. Desert sand ignited and melted into glass. A mushroom cloud rose 10 kilometers high. 40 kilometers away, tunnels shook, dust poured from ceilings. A young engineer screamed. It worked, it exploded. But no one could hear him. Only the white light and an overwhelming silence. Minutes later, as the shockwaves faded, they emerged from the bunker. Before them stretched a flat, black plain, the tower gone, replaced by a crater of smoke and molten sand. Someone whispered, almost crying. It's beautiful, terribly beautiful. A soldier bowed his head. From this moment on, China has a voice. The message reached Beijing within minutes. 596 completed. Result: success. When Mao Zedong received it, he simply nodded. Then he walked to the Jiangnan balcony, rain falling outside, and said softly, "Now no one can make us bow again." At that same moment, in Washington, Moscow, and Tokyo, seismographs recorded an unusual tremor in Xinjiang's desert. Analysts understood instantly. A new nuclear power had been born. The world was stunned. The West, speechless. And at Lop Nur, the workers sat beside the crater, faces lit by the glow. Radiant and broken. A young soldier said, "We've won." His comrade answered, "No, we've just given birth to a monster." The wind swept across Lop Nur again, erasing footprints, leaving only a vast black hole, silent, immense, like the eye of history, watching mankind. October 16, 1964, 3 p.m. China officially became the fifth nuclear nation on Earth. Not through aid, not through imitation, but through willpower, blood, and desert wind. That night, no one at Lop Nur slept. A scientist wrote in his journal, "We have awakened a new sun. And now, we must learn to live beneath its light." After the flash, the price of a man-made sun. 3 days after the explosion, Lop Nur was silent again. But it was no longer the land they once knew. The sand had turned to glass. No life remained around the crater, only gray dust, wind, and the acrid smell of metal. From afar, military convoys began to move into the inspection zone. They carried radiation detectors, optical lenses, and bright red warning signs. Radioactive, danger zone, high radiation. An old engineer opened his notebook, his hands trembling. Radiation levels, 800 times higher than normal. The commander signaled everyone to stop. No one was allowed to take another step. They only stood there, staring, at the place that, 3 days ago, had been the brightest spot on Earth, and was now its deepest wound. Inside the control bunker, Qian Sancheng quietly recorded data. On the wall hung a chart of the blast's energy output, 15% higher than expected. That meant the detonation was more successful than they had ever hoped. But he did not smile. It is said that after the report, he only murmured one line. "We have opened the door, but no one knows what lies beyond." A young engineer asked, "Professor, did we do the right thing?" Qian looked at him, eyes distant. "Right, if you believe destruction is a way to survive." In Beijing, the news of victory was announced on the national radio. The voice of the broadcaster rang across the country. On October 16, 1964, the People's Republic of China successfully conducted its first nuclear test. The motherland has entered a new era, one of independence, resilience, and strength. Crowds cheered. Fireworks burst over Tiananmen Square. Those who had starved during the Great Leap Forward wept, embracing one another in the streets. They believed that from this day onward, China stood equal to the great powers. But in a small room at Institute 221, a group of scientists sat in silence. On the table lay a radiation dispersion map, stretching from Lop Nur to populated regions hundreds of kilometers away. Someone whispered, "The wind is blowing east. If it rains, the fallout will follow." No one replied. No one dared imagine what that might mean. In distant villages near Xinjiang, herders began saying that the well water tasted strange, that their skin burned when they bathed. Sheep died in flocks. Children coughed endlessly. But no reports were filed. Every document was stamped, top secret, national security. A local official would later recall, "We were ordered not to ask, not to speak, not to look. Only to know, that in Lop Nur, they had made the sun explode." In his personal diary, a young physicist wrote, "I once believed I was protecting my country with science. But when I saw birds falling from the sky, burnt to ash, I wasn't sure anymore." He continued, "No one can stop history. But who will protect mankind from its own ambition?" Those lines were later erased from official archives. But a copy was found in a steel cabinet at the Institute of Nuclear Technology, in 1988. 25 years later, when Mao Zedong heard the first reports of radioactive contamination, he said simply, "To have grain, you must break the husk. To have weapons, you must accept sacrifice." For him, that price was part of national rebirth. But for those who witnessed it, it was a shadow that would never fade. That night, Qian Sancheng stepped outside the control room and looked up at a sky filled with dust. He whispered, "We have made the sun rise in the desert. But if we fail to understand its light, it will burn us all." The desert grew quiet again. The wind returned, covering all traces of human presence. But beneath the sand, radioactive ashes still smoldered, an unburied memory of an age that believed power could be salvation. Elsewhere, in a dark room of Institute 221, a new plan was being written. Its title read, "Two Bombs, One Satellite." After the Lop Nur explosion, the air inside the institute changed. No more shouting, no more countdowns. Only silence, the silence of those who had reached the edge of human effort. Only to realize it was just the beginning. Qian Sancheng sat before a world map of nuclear powers, the USSR, the USA, Britain, France. But another circle was drawn in red ink. Space. Through a confidential report, Mao sent down new orders. The bomb is for defense. But the satellite is to prove to the world that China can touch the heavens. Thus, the phrase, "two bombs, one satellite," appeared for the first time in official documents, a plan no one believed possible in a nation still starving, short of steel, and running on candlelight. But Mao's ambitions never waited for conditions. November 1964. Just weeks after the successful test, Beijing convened a secret meeting of senior scientists. Those who had just returned from Lop Nur, skin burned by sun and sand, were summoned again. They sat in a windowless room under dim yellow light. On the blackboard, someone wrote, "Project 642 bombs. One satellite." Below it, 3 lines. Atomic bomb, consolidate, replicate, miniaturize. Hydrogen bomb, extend the Teller-Ulam principle. Amplify destructive yield. Artificial satellite. Launch into orbit with domestic rocket technology. 3 targets. 3 years. The room fell silent. A young engineer muttered, "The Soviets took 10 years to go from bomb to satellite. We have 3?" No one answered. Then a senior scientist stood, pointing to Mao's portrait on the wall. "We have no choice. If the motherland demands 3 years, we'll do it in 3. Heads nodded, one by one. And so, Lop Nur became two things at once: a nuclear test site and a rocket research base. Train after train brought equipment from across China. Scientists learned new disciplines: propulsion, orbital mechanics, aerodynamics. They built wooden rocket mock-ups in the sand, tin satellite shells, then real ones in steel. Lacking materials, they recycled artillery casings, generator wires, and oil rig pipes. One recalled, "Every time we finished a weld, we wondered if it would survive launch vibrations." But there was no time to doubt, only to build and believe. In Beijing, Mao formed the National Defense Science Commission, reporting directly to the Central Committee. His order was clear: resources, manpower, intelligence, all must serve one goal: 2 bombs, 1 satellite. From farms to factories, from Anshan Steel to Shanghai Machinery Works, the entire nation rallied. A country that had barely survived famine now poured its last strength into a dream of flight. But behind the fervor lay grim reality. Radiation at Lop Nur persisted. Researchers fell ill, skin discolored, hair falling out, eyesight fading. No one was allowed to speak. No one was allowed to stop. In a private letter to his wife, Qian wrote, "I have seen the brightest light man has ever made. But I can feel it burning everything, flesh and soul alike. If one day we send a satellite to the sky, I hope it will shine, not explode." The letter was never sent. It was found in his desk years later, beside an old photograph of the first reactor. 18 months after China's first atomic test, Lop Nur was no longer a wasteland. Concrete buildings rose, antennas pierced the sky. A new sign appeared over the gate: Aerospace Engineering Research Center No. 9. Underground, a miniature reactor-powered rocket fuel experiments. Above ground, engineers gathered around a 30-meter metallic structure, the prototype Dongfeng rocket. Its name meant, East Wind. The east wind will blow away the dark clouds of the west. April 1965. A freezing desert night. On the launch pad, yellow lights shimmered on the rocket's silver body. In the control bunker, the countdown began. Qian Sancheng stood beside the operators, his face tense but calm. The clock ticked down, every second holding the breath of a nation. 10, 9, 8. Main engine ignition. A deep roar erupted. Flames burst outward, sand spiraled skyward. The Dongfeng rocket shook, then soared into the night, leaving a bright white trail across the desert sky. Everyone held their breath. Radar screens flickered. Qian clenched his fists. A voice whispered, "My God, it's flying." 15 minutes later, telemetry confirmed. The Dongfeng had reached an altitude of 180 kilometers, following its intended trajectory. No one spoke for a moment. Then the room erupted in cheers, tears, and embraces. At Lop Nur, where once a bomb had exploded, a new dream had taken flight. But behind that light, shadows fell. Many engineers died not in war, but from radiation, exhaustion, and silence. Their records were never published. One of them, Liu Zhen, a 32-year-old physicist, died 3 months after the launch. In his final notebook, he wrote, "If I don't wake up tomorrow, tell them this: we made it fly." That line became an unspoken oath at Lop Nur. In Beijing, when Mao heard of the rocket's success, he said simply, "Good, a poor nation can do this. Who will dare look down on us now?" He took a drag from his cigarette and gazed out the window. Perhaps, in that moment, he too understood. That power was not only forged from steel, but from those who stood in darkness so others could see the light. That autumn, Lop Nur was strangely peaceful. No more explosions. No more flashes lighting up the sky. Only small graves scattered among the sand, nameless, marked only with numbers. Engineer number 19, technician number 7. On the base's wind tower, a metal plaque was hung. Here, China found its own sun. Someone had written beneath it, in chalk. But that sun also burned away the darkness within. Lop Nur, the dead land in the desert, had become the cradle of both power and pride. From there, China entered the nuclear age, and reached for the stars. But the price of that dream was not just steel, uranium, or sand. It was the silent souls buried beneath it. For in history, every time mankind touches the power of the gods, it must pay a price. And Lop Nur, where the sun exploded, stands as proof of that truth.